Hello, everybody. This is some random Neko, waking up from her nap to greet the world for the day. And by greet, I mean jump back into the action-packed world of the immortal Old Guard now that its sequel, The Old Guard 2, has finally been released after multiple delays that essentially left it in a state of limbo. But was the sequel of one of the best action films Netflix surprisingly made worth the 3-year wait? The answer is no. No, it wasn't. Andy and her team of immortal warriors are back, with a renewed sense of purpose in their mission to protect the world. However, a mysterious foe emerges in the form of a woman who claims to be the first immortal, and threatens to jeopardize everything they've worked towards for thousands of years. With Booker still in exile after his betrayal, the Old Guard enlists the help of Tua, another immortal who may also provide the key to unlocking the mystery behind immortal existence. Meanwhile, Quinn unexpectedly returns, now seeking revenge after escaping her underwater prison. When the trailer for the Old Guard 2 first dropped, I was hyped as heck. The gang was coming back for an all-new mission while grappling with Andy's newly returned mortality and dealing with new and familiar faces appearing in the form of a newly freed Quinn, an immortal of the scholarly variety, and a woman who claims to be the first immortal. I was so excited. I couldn't wait to see where they were going to go with the story. And then the film came out and I watched it, only to be disappointed because this sequel wasn't even a real sequel. It was just the setup for another sequel. And it wasn't even a good setup either. But at the very least, there were a few good things about it. First are the new characters, Tua and Discord, who add to the fascinating lore of the Immortals. Tua is shown to be a lore keeper who's been recording the history of Immortals and their impact on the world for centuries. And Discord is the actual first Immortal, which makes you wonder what kind of history she's lived through and seen that would make her a foe instead of a friend. Then we have the best parts of the film, which are still the bonds shared amongst the Old Guard. I love the mentor-mentee relationship between Andy and Niall. I enjoyed the shared camaraderie between Andy and Booker that was formed due to the pain of loss they both suffered because of their immortality. And I especially loved the broken bond between Andy and Quinn. The best scene in the film was their reunion because of how emotionally raw it was, with Andy's guilt for never being able to rescue Quinn, and Quinn's hurt and resentment because Andy basically abandoned her when she stopped searching for her. Speaking of Quinn, we finally get to meet her in an official capacity, and I loved her from the start. Many kudos to Veronica Ngo, whose great acting really sold the broken and tortured soul Quinn has become. The great quality production from before is still there, and hey, it seems like they're actually using tripods and have a more stable Steadicam now, because the vast majority of shots weren't different shades of shaky. The soundtrack is also better as they stopped using only techno-electropop, so you're no longer jarred out of your immersion by the music. And the action scenes were still amazing, with the fights being more close combat based this time, which I appreciate since it leads to some interesting choreography and less choppy edits. However, the overall story was all over the place in terms of pacing, development, and details, making for a very confusing watch. Because with each new thing that's talked about or introduced, many questions were raised, but there was barely any explanation given to answer them that didn't end up raising more questions as a result. Major spoilers ahead, by the way, so please proceed at your own risk. To start with, while I'm glad to see how Quinn escaped, I'm also left wondering how she didn't manage to break free by herself. In the first film, Niall said she could feel Quinn banging on the coffin with each revival, and I thought, well, the coffin's probably been crusted over to the point of making a rock-hard protective shell, so maybe that's why she couldn't break free. But when we finally see the coffin, it wasn't completely covered in growth, and the chains were somehow completely intact. And I'm like, you're really going to tell me that a coffin made of iron from the 1500s managed to withstand the ocean and a crazed immortal banging on it for 500 years no problem? But a few whacks from a chisel was all it took for part of it to come off so easily? Then when we're introduced to Tua, the film makes it seem like he didn't meet the other immortals in order to still dream about them to keep tabs on them. But then that begs the question of why none of them besides Andy dreamt about him until Niall did, because the film makes a point to show that nobody except Andy knew about him. I thought the dreams were established to be a two-way street, not a one-way connection. And on that note, how come nobody dreamt about Discord? Why didn't Niall or Booker dream about Quinn's escape? What even are the rules for this, because dreams seem to solely exist for plot convenience now? And when we finally get to meet Discord, the questions pile up even more. How do we know Discord is actually the first immortal besides what she and Tua say? Why does Niall have the power to take immortality away because she's apparently the last immortal, but they don't tell you why she's the last immortal, except for a birthmark she and Discord happen to share? And why are they saying Niall took Andy's immortality away when Andy healed after Niall stabbed her as opposed to when Booker and Quinn were cut by her and it didn't heal at all? Where did the myth about the last immortal even come from? How do you explain the fact that immortality can still disappear without Niall's help, like what happened to Lycon who was dead long before Niall was even born? And if Niall so special as the last immortal, then what's so special about Discord other than the fact that she's the first? And what do you mean you can transfer immortality now? You can tell they're trying to add lore to the immortality aspect of the story to make it less ambiguous. But the problem is that they don't even fully commit to it, and it was the ambiguity that made it work so well in the first place, because it forced each character to find a way to cope with having immortality and added tension knowing they could lose it at any point in time. There's also way too many other things that mess with the story as well. Like, I don't understand why Copley, who's supposed to be the guy in the chair and is 100% mortal, is suddenly an active combatant in their missions. And how did Niall and Nikki figure out Joe was visiting Booker and find his place before Joe even went there? How did Joe even hide all of this from Nikki in the first place? Also, Quinn's rebuttal of Andy's offer to join her again was weird because the dialogue made it sound like she never helped Andy protect mortals at all, but in the first film we clearly see her do just that. Then some of the flashbacks don't make much sense in how they tie into the story, specifically the one with Quinn and Andy from however long ago, and then that walk through the alley which looked cool but didn't make sense narratively. Also, Nikki and Joe no longer feel like active participants in the story, and their soulmate connection seemed to be reduced to a really good friends vibe that I was absolutely not here for. The overall pace made it feel like the story was taking forever to get to each beat, even though the runtime was shorter than the first one by 20 minutes. And I don't know what's going on, but if I had a nickel for every time the third act of an Old Guard film sucked, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's stupid that it happened twice. The entire sequence at the nuclear facility felt slow-paced and underwhelming, with not much tension going on despite the whole thing being a trap. Booker's sacrifice was a powerful scene, but I hated that this was how Andy became immortal again, and the end of it felt kind of abrupt as well. Then Niall lecturing Quinn for betraying Andy annoyed me a lot, because they had Discord rudely cut it short instead of letting it play out. And I don't understand Andy and Quinn's conversation because it happens out of nowhere and is based on a previous scene that also happened out of nowhere. The entire helicopter sequence was dumb as heck too. Like, why did Discord circle back to Andy? Why didn't she try to capture her or just leave? And the battle between them that was hyped up to be this epic showdown turned into another example of why we should never trust trailers, because it revealed the sequel is actually a setup for another film, a part 1 of 2 instead of just 2. This left a sour taste in my mouth and reminded me of that time when everyone decided to split the last film of a series in 2 for no good reason other than to get more money. Except this time it's worse because there's no confirmation a third film will even happen, so they basically jumped the gun before the gun was even put in the display for sale. Overall, The Old Guard 2 gets a C-. It was only the close combat-focused action scenes and the Old Guard itself that saved this film from failing completely, because the story alone would have given it a D at best. However, I do appreciate that they at least learned their lesson about the soundtrack so that it didn't take you out of the immersion, and the production quality is thankfully still good with no more different shades of shaky. The introduction of Quinn and the conflict between her and Andy was the best part of the story, and it's a shame they didn't focus more on it or give it a better conclusion. It's also a shame that viewers weren't given a sequel that properly introduced the interesting elements of the first Immortal, the Scar Litua, and the newly freed Quinn, but instead were given a sequel that's a setup for an unconfirmed third installment and was full of lore that raised more questions than it actually answered. Honestly, everything about this film was just off. Like they wanted to do something but didn't quite know where to go with it, or had a different story in mind but then someone interfered, chopping everything up and Frankensteining it into the confusing mess we have as a result. Hopefully, the Old Guard 3 will be confirmed soon, and it'll have a story that can redeem this mess, because otherwise, I highly suggest you don't watch the Old Guard 2, unless you want to be left on a disappointing and confusing cliffhanger. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Reminder that this is just my opinion, so you can take it with as many grains of salt as you want. I know my either way, and would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment which film you'd like me to give my 2 cents about next. Also, this is part 1 of a 2-parter as I was so disappointed by this film, my brain just had to start coming up with an alternative storyline it could have followed. So please look forward to a rewrite video, which will be out after I release the rewrite video for Disney's live-action Snow White, which should hopefully be done soon. Anyways, this is some random Neko going off to dispel my disappointment now. Don't forget to keep calm and just meow.